From the Mapleview Animal Hospital studios, this is the WHTC Morning News with Gary Stevens and Peg McNichol on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
Welcome back to the WHTC Morning News for this Tuesday, August 11th. Tuesday mornings at this time, we have a chance to chat with Congressman Fred Upton of St. Joseph, the Republican who serves Allegan County in the U.S. House. He is chatting from his home in St. Joe's. Good morning, Fred. Hope all is well.
It's a good day. Everybody survived this storm, I think, right? Quite the monster that raced across the lake last night.
Yeah, it raced across and did some damage along the I-94 corridor. We got a brushing up here along the lake shore, but some things we need to discuss about, and we'll start first with something that your office has just published or sent out. You and Democratic U.S. House Representative Debbie Dingell of Dearborn sent out a bipartisan letter. 13 members of the state's congressional delegation signed it to get Michigan back into the full reimbursement of National Guard costs due to COVID-19. They're cutting corners. Granted, we have to pay for some of the things we're trying to do to help recover from this pandemic, Fred, but you know, sometimes some corners that need to be cut should be cut elsewhere. I think that's the general gist of the letter.
Well, that's right. And, you know, what's I guess one of the things we wanted to point out, a number of states were included for full funding. California, Texas, Florida, sort of can guess those. Our state was left off. I heard from the governor last week. She reached out to me, seeing if I could help. I reached out to Debbie Dingell. Of course, we're the two of the vice chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And we put a letter together, got everybody to sign it with the exception of Hamas, not unusual. But there's no reason we should be treated differently than other states, knowing that we've had a full load of COVID. But this protects our guard. This makes sure that they have the right benefits. Remember, these are volunteers that serve. There's no draft. I mean, this is something that we recruit. I was at a recruiting office just this last week in Kalamazoo. We need to make sure that our guard folks have the right resources, and we shouldn't be left behind. And that's what this letter asked for. We're anxious to hear a response back from the White House.
Now, the thing is, though, and a point I was bringing up a little bit earlier on this, Fred, is the fact that we're running the national debt even more with all of the stimulus packages, aid packages, tax breaks, and the like. We're going to have to pay for it eventually.
Well, that's right, but we're not going to be in a position to do so unless we recover from this. We want our economy to rebound. We want to get through this spell, that is for sure. And we will be in a far better position down the road to do that with economic growth, with people back to work, with a vaccine, to restore that way of life, if in fact we do the right steps now. So we don't want to be short-sighted. We want to move forward, and we need the same resources that other states have been given as well.
Congressman Fred Upton, I do want to talk about vaccines for a minute. I just got something over our wires. A state-controlled Russian news agency reports that President Vladimir Putin made an announcement today that the Russian Health Ministry is authorizing a COVID-19 vaccine for the public's use. Made the announcement during a meeting with government officials. The vaccine was developed by a scientific research institute of epidemiology and microbiology in Moscow in connection with the Ministry of Defense. In an announcement, Putin said as far as he is aware, it's the first COVID-19 vaccine to be registered for public use anywhere in the world. He said one of his two daughters has had 2 injections of the vaccine and is doing well. CBS, one of the CBS reporters was saying, this has the look of the space race and the space age. We remember that very, very well.
Well, I do, and if it works, good for them. It doesn't have the same standard as the FDA approval. We made sure when we did 21st Century Cures a number of years ago that we're not going to cut corners. We're going to make sure that all that safety is there. That is going to be a requirement for any of the vaccines that are produced here in this country. And of course, in the next couple of days, we expect Pfizer to gin up to begin production of as much as 40 million doses before the end of the year. But you know what? They're not going to be distributed until we know that they're approved by the FDA. They're they're the gold standard. They're the ones that the rest of the world looks at. I don't know that the FDA has had a chance to look at the studies, the clinical studies, the research that Russia did. That'll be a question that I'll ask them later on today. But good for them if they think they have something. But let's make sure that the safety requirements are met, certainly before any vaccine is distributed here in the U.S.
The thing I found humorous about the fact that the space age reference was used in that thing is the fact that for all of what there might have been criticism about the space age and the space race during the 60s, it did stimulate a lot of development. It moved us forward a great deal scientifically that we wouldn't have moved this forward as quickly if we didn't try to fulfill President Kennedy's pledge of getting a man to the moon and back to the earth before the end of the 1960s.
Well, you're right. And as we look at COVID, I mean, one of the frustrations that we've had is that the FDA and the CDC researchers were not allowed into China to actually look firsthand at what was impacting them. That delay cost us, not only in terms of shutting things down here, encouraging people to wear masks, but actually the production of what hopefully will be a vaccine that works. So that delayed us, cost a lot of lives. Let's face it, as we now hit 20 million people testing positive for this worldwide. So let's hope that they do have their act together. We'll see. But in the meantime, we're going to proceed at the right speed. Operation Warp Speed is actually what the code name is by the administration, and the funding that the Congress has approved to find a vaccine that actually works.
We're talking with Congressman Fred Upton, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin told CNBC that the Trump administration is open to more stimulus talks with Democratic leaders. The president's prepared to put more aid money on the table to strike a deal, and that the administration is willing to do it this week if we can get a fair deal. Your thoughts about the president's decision to go with the executive order for now, and could we see something that could get you and other House representatives back in Washington in a short period of time?
Well, I want to support a bipartisan package. We have divided government. No side is going to run over the other. You've got a veto. No one's going to override a veto. You've got a Republican Senate, a Democratic House. The only way to get things done is if you work together. Look, we have an enormous problem right now. Our schools are starting to reopen around the country. They don't have the right resources to that not only their kids, but their teachers and other personnel are protected yet. We got to make sure that happens. There was $100 billion that was included in Mitch McConnell's opening offer with the Senate. We've seen the gridlock the last couple of weeks. Nothing's happened. We're concerned about those with unemployment benefits. We want to make sure that, in fact, we can reach out with broadband to underserved areas to make sure that kids are not left behind when, in fact, we know that for many of these kids, maybe even 80 to 90% of our students may have to be doing e-learning at least 1, 2, maybe even 3 or 4 days a week at school. They don't have broadband. There's a number of things that I think we can do collectively together. Let's hope that these talks start back in earnest this morning, and we can get a package deal that's bipartisan that, in fact, will then call the House back as early as perhaps next week to try and get a vote on the package and send it to the president where he could sign it.
Let's finish our conversation about that Rural Broadband Acceleration Act that you sponsored and trying to push through to increase broadband. And there's been some discussion, Fred, about the fact that perhaps not only about broadband, but also social media, it's getting to the point now that they may have to start becoming into the public domain, just as we had electricity some years ago, and some of the other utilities. Make it a utility because it's becoming more and more of a priority for people, not just a luxury.
Well, let's face it, it's an important infrastructure need that our country is needing, that's for sure. Just like we saw with the interstate highway system back in the late 50s and 60s, communities want to be connected. One of the things that we've certainly learned through this COVID experience is that if you don't have it, man, are you lost? Particularly if you've got kids in school or college, whether you're a business, you want an internet broadband connection, and we have vast areas, particularly rural ones, but even in the inner cities as well, that don't have access to broadband. And we don't want those families, kids, workers to be left behind. It's time that we actually do that. We're tired of empty promises. Jim Clyburn and I have introduced bipartisan legislation that seems to be generating a lot of support. We're seeing similar efforts now in the Senate. I'd like to think that whatever bill actually reaches the president in the next week or two, as it relates to COVID, will include our provision, which, as I talked to the chairman of the FCC just last week, they want to see something done too. We've got a bill that will do that.
One final thing, Fred, I just got a note from one of our listeners. With the stimulus package or the extended aid and the executive order, part of that executive order was dealing with tenants situations, evictions. That's, to me, it's a two-way street. Not only are dealing with tenants, but also with the small mom and pop, to a certain extent, property owners, not just the big corporations that own big apartment buildings and complexes. That's got to be taken care of too. Make it fair for them as well as fair for the tenants.
Well, that's right, and I'm hopeful that we can see legislation that will accommodate both of those. It seems as though they're pretty close on that part of the equation, as well as shutoffs. And I've been talking to our utilities to make sure that they're not doing that. And if someone's in desperate need, they should reach out right away to their utility to see if there's some way that they could extend the payments, do a variety of different things to make sure that that in fact doesn't happen. But it'll be part of an overall larger package that's got some pretty big elements. And it's sad to say that maybe they haven't drank enough beer, eaten enough pizza, or kept that door locked and closed and to try and get the job done. Seriously, they need to get it done. They need to come together. Time is a wasting. Our schools are starting to open, and we need to make sure that the kids, especially with the report just that came out today, a dramatic increase in COVID cases among children. We don't want them to be impacted. There are steps that we need to get to conclude. Let's stop this partisan sniping.
He is Congressman Fred Upton. He joins us Tuesday mornings to talk about what's going on in Washington. And Fred, if all goes well, let's do this again next Tuesday morning. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
You bet.
Thank you very much, Fred Upton, on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.